My name is Rebecca. I'm 34 years old. At my brother's wedding, he turned a room full of guests against me with one sentence that I wasn't even half the woman his new wife was. Everyone laughed, my parents beamed with pride for him, and I sat there invisible. But what they didn't know was that I carried a secret powerful enough to turn the tables. So what happens when the sister they dismissed finds her voice in the very place they thought she'd stay silent? I promise you this story will make you rethink everything you know about family pride and karma. The chandeliers sparkled above me, throwing light across the ballroom of the Waldorf in New York. Every detail screamed luxury white linens, crystal glasses, the soft notes of a violin quartet. People whispered it was the wedding of the year, Daniel Harrison marrying Charlotte Whitmore, the heiress. Everyone in Manhattan seemed to know. For me, his only sister, it was something else. Daniel rose from his chair, tuxedo pressed to perfection, glass of red wine in hand. He looked out at the crowd, then straight at me. A smirk slid across his face. "Rebecca," his voice carried through the microphone, "you're not even half the woman my wife is." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Some guests chuckled openly, others leaned in with knowing smiles. A woman near me whispered, "Poor thing, consulting wasn't it?" Her companion shook his head. Meanwhile, Daniel marries Whitmore money. Quite the contrast. Heat crept up my neck, but I didn't move. Daniel wasn't finished. From his pocket he pulled out a neat stack of my business cards, the ones I had designed with embossed lettering, every cent counted. He fanned them once, then let them fall. One by one they slipped to the floor, scattering at his feet. The sound was soft, but in my ears it roared, my name. My work tossed like scraps for the world to see. I tightened my grip on the clutch in my lap, my nails biting into the leather. My first instinct was to kneel to gather them up before anyone could step on them. But I stayed still. If I bent down, I would look defeated. And Daniel wanted me to look defeated. A man at the table across the aisle chuckled, "Consulting. That's not even a job. It's a fancy word for unemployed." Another voice answered, "At least she'll always have Daniel to take care of her now that Charlotte's in the family." The humiliation spread wider than Daniel's words. It was in the whispers, in the sideways glances, in the way no one stood up for me. Inside, something stirred. Not tears, not shame, something harder. I lifted my chin. Across the room, Daniel caught the motion. His smirk twitched just slightly before he turned back to the crowd and raised his glass high. "To my wife Charlotte, the perfect woman." The applause thundered. Glasses clinked. The quartet struck a brighter tune as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. I sat there, my cards scattered on the red carpet, my dignity questioned by an entire ballroom. Yet I wasn't broken. I let the spotlight hit me too, so that every guest could see my face, not bowed, not weeping, but steady. And then I saw it. Near the back of the room, a man bent down and picked up one of my cards. He wasn't dressed like the rest. No glittering tux, no designer tie. His eyes flicked toward me, curious. Instead of discarding it, he slipped the card into his jacket pocket. It was a small moment, almost invisible to everyone else. But I noticed. Someone had seen what the others had missed. Daniel kept talking, basking in Charlotte's glow, milking every ounce of attention. My parents beamed in the front row, proud beyond words of their son, of the glamorous bride who had just tied our family name to a fortune. None of them looked at me, and that was fine. Let them look away. Let them believe I was invisible. The truth was, I had learned to live in the shadows they left me, to work quietly to build something behind their backs while they laughed. Tonight they saw only failure. They didn't know I had been preparing for years. The quartet changed songs again, and conversation shifted back to champagne and real estate deals. The cards still lay on the floor. At last I rose. Slowly, carefully, I bent and gathered them into my hand. A few people watched, smirking, thinking I was salvaging scraps. They were wrong. I was reclaiming what was mine. I pressed the stack back into my clutch, shut it firmly, and sat tall. Around me the laughter swelled again, but inside me a vow crystallized. They would not laugh forever. The day would come when the same crowd would fall silent, when Daniel would see me not as his shadow, but as something else entirely. CEO. The night after the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Daniel's words echoed in my head like an old recording stuck on repeat. "You're not even half the woman my wife is." The sound of laughter, the sight of my cards scattered across the ballroom floor, it wouldn't let me rest. So I sat in my apartment, the city buzzing outside my window. Yellow cabs darted down Lexington Avenue, horns blaring, neon signs blinking. But in my small living room, all I heard was the hum of my laptop. Its glow lit up the walls as I opened the email that had landed just days before the wedding. Transaction completed. Whitmore Holdings. I clicked it open with trembling hands. My eyes ran over the lines again and again. Aurora Ventures, the company I had built from scratch. The company everyone dismissed as a side project was now the majority shareholder of Whitmore Holdings. 62%. Control, not influence. Ownership, not speculation. I leaned back in my chair. 7 years of sleepless nights. 7 years of pitching to investors who laughed of running numbers in diners, while waitresses refilled my coffee of missing birthdays because I couldn't afford to slow down. All of it led here. Tucked at the bottom of the email was a short line almost hidden: "Rebecca, time will come. Be patient. The board stands with you." It wasn't just a transaction notice. It was a promise. Somewhere in that boardroom there were people who believed in me even when my own family didn't. I closed my eyes for a second. I could almost hear the clinking of champagne glasses in my parents' house. They were probably still bragging to the neighbors about Charlotte, the brilliant daughter-in-law, the Whitmore heiress, the one who had supposedly elevated our family name. Not a word about me. Earlier that week, I had stopped by my parents' home in Queens. The old brownstone hadn't changed since childhood. The same wallpaper, the same heavy curtains, the same smell of my mother's pot roast lingering in the air. I stepped inside, hoping for a moment of warmth. Instead, I found my parents on the phone with Aunt Linda. "Oh yes, Linda." My mother's voice rang with pride. "We couldn't be luckier. Charlotte is extraordinary. A businesswoman, a philanthropist. She's everything we dreamed of for our Daniel." I stood in the doorway, invisible. Not once did they mention me. Not once did they acknowledge that while Charlotte had inherited her position, I had built mine brick by brick. When the call ended, my father turned to me with a casual smile. "Rebecca, you should take notes from Charlotte. Maybe one day you'll find your footing. Women do well when they have strong men beside them." I bit my tongue. I wanted to say, "Dad, Aurora Ventures just acquired your precious Whitmore Holdings." But I didn't. They weren't ready to hear it. And maybe I wasn't ready to say it. Because if I revealed it too soon, Daniel would spin it, twist it, maybe even sabotage it. Timing mattered. Timing was everything. Back in my apartment, the email opened on my screen. I clenched my fists. Daniel humiliated me in front of 300 guests. My parents humiliated me without even realizing it every time they ignored what I had built, every time they compared me to Charlotte. Their silence was louder than his insults. But silence can cut both ways. I reached for the stack of documents on my desk. Acquisition papers signed and sealed. NDA agreements airtight. The board consent tucked neatly in its folder. Every piece of it was real. Every piece was mine. And yet no one knew. Not Daniel, not Charlotte, not even my parents. To them I was still the daughter who hadn't settled down, the sister who couldn't measure up. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Rebecca, did you see the article about Charlotte? She's on the cover of Forbes. Isn't that wonderful?" I laughed bitterly. The irony was almost too sharp. Yes, I saw the article. What she didn't know was that the magazine had called me earlier that week, asking for comment on the acquisition. I had declined, choosing instead to let the silence build until the right moment. I typed a short reply. "Yes, I saw it. She looks great." Then I set the phone face down. I stood and walked to the window. Manhattan glittered below, alive and loud. But up here in my quiet apartment, I felt the weight of the secret pressing against me. It wasn't just about business. It was about years of being underestimated, ignored, overlooked. The humiliation from the wedding had left a mark, but it also gave me clarity. They thought they had written my story. They thought Daniel's toast defined me. But I held the ending in my hands. I touched the laptop screen one more time, the words glowing back at me, transaction completed. Then I closed it, locked the file away in a hidden folder, password protected, encrypted. This wasn't the time. Not yet. Because revenge, if you could even call it that, wasn't about shouting back in the moment. It was about waiting, watching, letting arrogance build until it tipped under its own weight. I poured myself a glass of water, sat back down, and let the stillness settle. In my mind, I saw Daniel raising his glass, my parents nodding in admiration, Charlotte smiling at the cameras. I saw the guests whispering about the sister who would never amount to anything. And then over all of it, I saw the truth. A single email, a single deal, enough to flip the board completely. I smiled, faint but steady. They thought I was powerless. They had no idea how wrong they were. Driving back after the wedding, the city looked brighter than ever, neon signs, glowing headlights, cutting through the night, crowds spilling out of bars. But inside my car, it felt cold, almost empty. The windshield wipers kept sweeping away the drizzle, steady and mechanical, while my mind replayed Daniel's words. "You're not even half the woman my wife is." That sentence wasn't new. It was just louder this time, public this time. But the sting it started years ago, long before the wedding. I parked outside my apartment in Manhattan and sat still, my fingers gripping the steering wheel. The memory came back sharp, like I had been waiting for it. I was 16 when I first noticed the difference. Daniel got a new set of golf clubs for his birthday, imported, engraved with his initials. I got a used bicycle, a hand-me-down from a neighbor. "Daniel's lessons are important," my father said when I asked. "Yours can wait." He was always the golden child. Private school, Ivy League, a trust fund lined up. I had scholarships, part-time jobs, and endless reminders to be practical. The worst was at the dinner table. I remember sliding a folder across the table one night, my hands sweating. It was my first business plan. Aurora Ventures was just an idea, then scribbled out on college-ruled paper and typed up late at night. "Take a look," I said, trying to sound confident. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirking. He didn't even flip past the cover page. This, he laughed. "You call this a business plan? Rebecca, stop dreaming. You should be thinking about finding a husband, not playing pretend CEO." The room erupted in chuckles. Even my mother, who usually stayed quiet, shook her head with a pitying smile. I didn't argue. I stuffed the papers back into my bag, feeling heat rise in my face. That night I cried into a pillow silently so no one could hear. But something hardened inside me too. Years later, when Daniel failed at his first startup, our parents still praised him. "At least he's ambitious," my father said. "At least he takes risks." When I signed my first small contract for Aurora Ventures, my mother brushed it off. "You just got lucky, Rebecca. Don't get carried away." It wasn't just the words. It was the way they looked at me, as if I were a temporary shadow, not someone capable of building something real. And then Charlotte came into the picture. The perfect daughter-in-law. The Whitmore name carried weight, money, influence. Suddenly my parents glowed with pride again, talking about charity galas and penthouse apartments, about how Daniel had made it. Meanwhile, I became invisible. I was no longer the daughter trying. I was the sister who hadn't measured up, the one they mentioned as an afterthought. Sitting in my apartment after the wedding, I pulled open the desk drawer. Inside was the same folder from years ago, my very first Aurora plan. The paper was creased, the ink faded, but I kept it. Proof that even when no one believed, I kept going. I remembered one night vividly, a rare moment when I snapped. Dinner again, the table filled with food laughter circling around Daniel's stories. He was boasting about an investment pitch that had flopped, but my parents still clapped for him, still admired his courage. I slammed my fork down. "I have value too," I said louder than I intended. "Why don't you ever see that?" The table went quiet for a heartbeat. I thought maybe, just maybe, they would understand. But then Daniel laughed. He reached over, patted my shoulder like I was a child. "Rebecca, don't delude yourself. You're not built for this world. Leave the big stuff to me." Everyone joined in chuckling, shaking their heads. The moment of silence vanished. and with it my last shred of hope that they'd see me differently. Back in the present, I stared into the bathroom mirror. My eyes were tired, dark circles shadowed beneath them. But behind that fatigue, something else burned. Old wounds have a way of shaping you. They are scary, yes, but they also remind you of what you've survived. Daniel thought humiliating me at the wedding was fresh and clever. He didn't realize it was just one more brick stacked on top of years of dismissal. I traced the edge of that faded folder with my fingers. Never again, I whispered. Because those wounds weren't just pain anymore. They were fuel, and I was done letting him or anyone else decide what I was worth. When the time came, Daniel wouldn't just see my face across the table. He'd see every sacrifice, every ignored word, every old scar, and he'd realize I was still standing, stronger than before. And next time, it wouldn't be me leaving the table in silence. The morning after the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my untouched coffee. The steam curled upward, vanishing into the quiet, but my mind was still back in the ballroom. Daniel's smirk, the laughter, the sound of my business cards hitting the floor. Sleep hadn't helped. Nothing had. Then the phone rang. My mother's voice came through sweet and buoyant, as if nothing had happened. Rebecca wasn't Charlotte wonderful last night. We're so blessed. Truly, Daniel chose perfectly. Her words pricked like needles. Not once did she ask how I was. Not once did she mention the humiliation. I listened in silence until she hung up her cheer, lingering like perfume I couldn't wash away. By evening, I found myself at my parents' house in Queens. The brownstone was lit warm against the winter dusk. I walked through the familiar doorway, the smell of pot roast wrapping around me. It could have been any Sunday from my childhood, except now the tension in my chest was unbearable. Inside the dining table gleamed under the chandelier. Relatives filled every chair, Aunt Linda in her pearls, Uncle Robert with his booming laugh, my cousins Ethan and Rachel whispering at the end of the table. My parents flitted around glowing with pride, their energy centered on Charlotte's every move from the night before. She carried herself like royalty, my mother gushed. Her speech, her grace. We couldn't have asked for more. My father raised his glass. Daniel really secured our family's future. A wife like Charlotte ensures everything. Stability, status, respect. I sat at the far end, the chill of the window at my back. The chatter rolled over me, story after story about Charlotte's accomplishments, her family's investments, her flawless reputation. Every word painted Daniel as a visionary. Every laugh pushed me further into the shadows. Then Aunt Linda's voice cut through, softer but sharp enough to slice the air. Stability, status. Perhaps. But I watched Daniel last night. She set down her fork deliberately. The way he mocked Rebecca in front of everyone, that wasn't grace. That was arrogance. The room froze. My father's smile faltered, but only for a second. He was celebrating Linda. A little joke, nothing more. Aunt Linda's brow arched. A little joke, I've seen jokes. That was cruelty. And the room noticed. You might laugh it off, but others won't. Daniel forgets people are watching more closely than he thinks. Murmurs stirred. My mother's lips tightened. She shot a glance at me as though I had somehow invited Linda's words. I said nothing. I didn't need to. At the other end, my cousin Ethan shifted. He was 25. Quiet, always the observer. For years he'd said little at family dinners, fading into the background. But now he leaned forward, his voice low yet firm. Aunt Linda's right. I heard people whispering last night. Not admiration, disgust. They were asking how someone could treat his own sister like that. My uncle scoffed. Ethan, you don't understand business. Daniel married into wealth. That's not arrogance, that's strategy. But Ethan didn't back down. His eyes met mine, steady. Maybe. But treating family like collateral isn't a strategy. It's a weakness. The silence that followed stretched thin. My father cleared his throat, trying to pull the conversation back. Enough. We should focus on Charlotte's virtues. Rebecca, maybe you'll learn from her example. It's time you thought about settling down. A woman needs the right man at her side. The words landed heavy. For a moment I wanted to laugh sharp bitter, but I only took a sip of water. My glass trembled slightly, but my voice did not. Maybe a woman doesn't need a man at her side to prove her worth, I said quietly. The table stiffened. A fork clattered. My mother gave a nervous laugh. Always so defensive, Rebecca. We only want what's best for you. Daniel chose that moment to smirk, leaning back in his chair like a king surveying subjects. Don't worry, Rebecca. With Charlotte and me around, you'll always have somewhere to land. We won't let you starve. Laughter rippled again, cruel and easy. But not from everyone. Aunt Linda shook her head in disgust. Ethan kept his eyes on me, steady, a flicker of something like solidarity passing between us. Inside, I felt the old fury rise, but I forced it down. Instead, I reached for the wine, poured slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch before I spoke. Funny, I said, my tone calm, almost light. Last night, I thought the same thing. That arrogance always looks like strength until it doesn't. The laughter faltered. Daniel's smirk twitched. My father's glass paused halfway to his lips. Aunt Linda smiled faintly, the only one who seemed to understand. Dinner dragged on, each toast more desperate, each compliment to Charlotte more exaggerated, as if piling words high enough would drown out the cracks that had begun to show. I stayed quiet, storing every detail, every glance, every dismissal. When it ended, I rose to leave. At the door, Ethan slipped past the others and caught up to me. His voice was barely a whisper. They don't see you, Rebecca. But I do. And so will everyone else soon. For the first time that evening, my chest loosened. Just slightly. I walked into the cold night air, my coat tight around me. Behind me, the house glowed warm, filled with laughter that no longer reached me. Ahead, the city stretched wide, restless and alive. Their favoritism still burned, their blindness still cut. But now I wasn't entirely alone. Aunt Linda's warning, Ethan's quiet support. They were cracks in the wall of denial my family had built, and cracks I knew had a way of spreading. I slipped into my apartment, shut the door, and let the quiet swallow me. The city outside was still alive, horns blaring, sirens echoing, but in here, there was only the soft hum of my laptop waiting on the desk. I hung my coat on the chair, poured a glass of water I barely touched, and sat down. The files glowed on the screen. Folders neatly labeled, locked with passwords, only I knew. One at the top carried a title that seemed to hum with its own electricity: Whitmore Holdings, Acquisition Papers. While my family clinked champagne glasses in celebration of Daniel and Charlotte, I was alone in this small apartment planning something that would turn their world upside down. Aurora Ventures. My company. My creation. What they never acknowledged, never respected, never even asked about. It had now secured 62% ownership of Whitmore Holdings, the empire Daniel's new wife had been paraded for. The contracts were signed. The board had voted. Non-disclosure agreements sealed everything tight. The world didn't know yet. Not even Charlotte, though soon enough she would. I leaned back in my chair, memories crowding in. Nights hunched over spreadsheets, circles under my eyes deepening with each 3 a.m. call. Countless meetings with lawyers in quiet offices, their words heavy with terms and conditions that would later become my shield. I had hidden behind shell companies layers of protection, making sure no one would trace Aurora back to me until I decided it was time. Daniel never suspected. My parents certainly didn't. To them, I was still the unstable one. The one who never settled down, never fit the mold. I clicked open an email from weeks ago, one I must have read 100 times. A board member, an older woman who had once fought her own battles in corporate rooms full of men, had left me a single line at the end of her approval note: Rebecca, patience is your greatest weapon. When the time is right, the board will bow to you. I had held on to those words the way some people held on to family. Because in truth, I had no family in that sense. Not anymore. My eyes drifted across the desk until they landed on a single object, a business card. Plain white, clean black font. Rebecca, founder and CEO, Aurora Ventures. Daniel once held this very card between two fingers, smirked, and let it fall to the floor like garbage. His shoe had crushed it before I could pick it up. The sound of it snapping under his heel had stayed with me. I picked it up now, running a thumb over the raised letters. He had dismissed it. They all had. But this card wasn't just paper. It was proof. Proof of the nights I had chosen work over comfort strategy, over ease survival, over applause. For a moment I wondered if I should tell them now. Reveal it all. Watch their smug faces collapse. Maybe then my mother would stop comparing me to Charlotte. Maybe then my father would stop praising Daniel as if he carried the family name alone. But the thought dissolved as quickly as it came. No, they didn't deserve an early warning. Not after the sneers, the lectures, the way my own mother had told me I should learn from Charlotte. They had chosen money, appearances, and pride. I would let them keep choosing it right up until the moment the ground gave way beneath their feet. I closed the laptop with a click. The files were safe, hidden away again. Slowly I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a fresh stack of those same business cards, and laid them neatly in a line. Each one carried the name they refused to say with pride mine. Standing, I walked to the balcony. The city was restless tonight, taxis honking below, crowds moving through lit streets. I gripped the railing, breathed in the cold air, and let it settle me. They saw me as a shadow. They believed Daniel had secured the family's future through Charlotte. But what none of them knew, what none of them could imagine, was that I had already secured something greater. Something they couldn't erase, dismiss, or laugh off. When the right moment came, the world would know. Daniel would know. My parents would know. And once that truth was out, there would be no way back. The hotel in Manhattan gleamed brighter than the city lights that night. Chandeliers hung low, scattering golden light across polished marble floors. Outside cameras flashed like fireworks, capturing every step of the so-called couple of the year. Inside, the air buzzed with perfume, laughter, and the faint sound of string instruments. I arrived quietly wearing a simple black dress. It wasn't flashy, but it was sharp, a silent statement that I wasn't here to compete with Charlotte's spotlight. Yet the moment I stepped into the lobby, I felt the shift. Heads turned, eyes followed, voices lowered just enough for me to hear, though they pretended I couldn't. Isn't that Rebecca Daniel's sister? Still not married, still not settled. What does she even do these days? I heard she runs some small consulting thing. Meanwhile, Daniel married Charlotte. Now that's a match. Each word cut sharper than the last, but I kept my chin high, clutched steady in my hand. My face betrayed nothing. I had lived too long in the shadows of whispers like these to let them see me break. As I moved further into the hall, the murmurs followed. Daniel's wife is an heiress, Whitmore Holdings. That family owns half the city. Another voice laughed softly. Rebecca must feel so small next to that. Life really isn't fair. I stopped at the edge of the room, watching the crowd swirl. Champagne flutes sparkled in manicured hands. Conversations rose and fell like waves, but beneath it all, I caught the sound of my parents. My mother's voice rang with pride. Charlotte is such a blessing to our family. Elegant, accomplished, generous. She smiled at a cluster of relatives, glowing as if Charlotte's shine reflected on her. My father, glass in hand, added his refrain, one he'd repeated too many times. Daniel made the right choice. A wife like Charlotte means our family's future is secure. He didn't even look my way. And then with a chuckle that felt like a shove, he said, Rebecca is here too. It's good for her to see what success looks like. Maybe she'll learn something. The laughter that followed was polite but cruel. My grip on the clutch tightened until my knuckles whitened. For a second, I wanted to shout across the room to ask them if they even remembered the years I had spent building something of my own. But no one here wanted to hear that story. To them, I was a footnote at my brother's wedding, an afterthought in my own family's pride. I forced myself to breathe, to listen without reacting. The humiliation wasn't new, it was familiar. But familiarity didn't make it sting any less. What struck hardest wasn't the strangers mocking me nor my parents dismissing me. It was the fact that none of them had ever stopped to wonder what I had been doing in the years I stayed silent. Then something unexpected broke through the noise. A guest near me fumbled with his coat, and a folded newspaper slipped from his pocket, landing on the marble floor. The headline across the front page screamed of market turbulence, but it wasn't the bold type that caught my eye. At the bottom corner, almost hidden, was a smaller headline: Aurora Ventures quietly acquires majority stake in Whitmore Holdings. My breath caught. My pulse quickened. Aurora Ventures. My company. My shield, my creation, was finally bleeding into the world outside the boardroom. The whispers in this room were about Charlotte's fortune, her influence, her family's empire. None of them realized that the empire already had a new ruler, one sitting quietly in their midst. I bent down, picked up the newspaper, and handed it back to the man with a calm smile. "You drop this," I said softly. He thanked me and tucked it away without reading. He had no idea that he had just handed me a sign, a reminder of what was coming. Around me, the chatter carried on. Compliments about Charlotte's gown, speculation about the honeymoon, endless praise for Daniel's luck. They thought the evening was about the couple standing at the center of the stage, but I knew better. From the corner of the room, I spotted my reflection in a tall mirror, shoulders squared, eyes steady. No one else noticed, but I did. The woman staring back at me wasn't the overlooked sister anymore. She was the one holding the silent key to everything this family worshipped. The music shifted, swelling into something brighter. A hush rippled through the crowd as an usher stepped forward. The cue had been given. The bride was about to make her entrance. All heads turned toward the grand doors at the back of the hall. The anticipation thickened, voices faded, and even the whispers about me finally died. I sank into my chair, clutch resting in my lap, and drew a slow, deliberate breath. They thought tonight was the pinnacle of Daniel's triumph, the crowning moment of Charlotte's arrival into our family. They thought I was just a spectator, a shadow in the corner. But I wasn't here as a spectator. I was here as the storm they hadn't seen coming. And as the doors began to swing open, I whispered to myself, unheard by anyone else, "Keep watching. The silence won't last long." The music swelled, rising like a wave that pulled the entire hall to its feet. Golden doors at the far end opened slowly, deliberately, as if the room itself had been holding its breath for this moment. Charlotte appeared in white. The gown shimmered under the chandeliers, every bead and stitch catching the light, as if the stars themselves had been sewn into the fabric. Her veil floated with each step. In her hands, a bouquet of white roses glowed against the glitter of her dress. The guests gasped, then clapped. Phones lifted, cameras flashed. It wasn't just an entrance, it was a coronation. Daniel, waiting at the altar, stood taller when he saw her. His tuxedo fit him like a second skin, his smirk stretching wider with every cheer. He extended his hand as if he had already won the prize of a lifetime. I glanced sideways. My parents had risen from their seats. My mother's hands were clasped together, trembling, her eyes shimmering with pride. She leaned toward me, whispering loud enough for the row to hear. "Rebecca, look at her. This is what real success looks like. This is who you should aspire to be." The words stung, though I kept my face neutral. I stared at Charlotte's slow, regal walk, my mother's voice still ringing in my ears. They didn't know. None of them did. Charlotte wasn't just a bride. She wasn't just the glittering heiress the crowd adored. She was once a name signed on a contract under mine. A strategist for Whitmore Holdings, who had worked closely with Aurora Ventures, reporting to me without ever knowing she'd someday stand here. I remembered the first time her signature crossed my desk. Sharp. Efficient. She delivered results quickly without drama. I had respected her work long before she became the bride. Tonight everyone thought Daniel had secured his triumph by marrying her. They didn't realize the irony that the empire she represented already rested under my hand. The whispers carried again, rising like another wave. Charlotte is managing the Whitmore family trust now. They say she's directing millions into investment funds. Daniel is the luckiest man alive. I pressed my clutch tighter, nails digging into the fabric. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Those funds, they praised the empire they envied, it was already partly mine. Every cheer for Charlotte, every word of awe for Daniel only underscored the absurdity of it all. And then something unexpected happened. Charlotte paused halfway down the aisle. Only for a second. The crowd hushed, thinking perhaps she needed to adjust her veil or catch her breath. But her eyes lifted, sweeping across the hall. Then they stopped me. It was the briefest glance, but I caught it. The curve of her lips shifted not into the radiant bride's smile everyone else saw, but into something smaller, sharper, intentional. She nodded, barely, almost imperceptible. My pulse spiked. The room faded around me. That nod wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for Daniel. It was for me. And I understood. She knew. She was ready. All at once I felt the wires pulling tight beneath the surface of this polished spectacle. The guests were clapping, the photographers snapping, Daniel preening. My parents, enraptured, wiped tears from their cheeks. But only Charlotte and I were in on the secret. Tonight wasn't just a wedding. Tonight was the stage for revelation. I sat back slowly, forcing my face into calmness. No one could see the storm beneath my skin. Daniel's pride swelled with every step Charlotte took toward him, as if he were absorbing her glory, making it his own. The crowd whispered again. He has everything now. Wealth, status, beauty. But he didn't. He didn't see the way his bride had looked at me. He didn't hear the silent message tucked inside that half smile. He had no idea the ground beneath his polished shoes was already crumbling. The music hit a crescendo. Charlotte reached him at last. She placed her hand in his, her smile dazzling, her veil catching in the soft breeze of the air conditioning. The applause swelled, shaking the room. People cheered, some even whistled. The cameras exploded in flashes, preserving the image of the perfect couple hand in hand, framed by flowers and silk. And through it all, I stayed still, watching. My blood rushed pounding with anticipation, each second heavier than the last. Daniel basked in the glory, holding Charlotte's hand high, as though he had conquered the world. My parents sobbed quietly, overcome with pride. Relatives whispered about the bright future, the endless doors Charlotte's wealth would open for our family. I knew better. The moment of truth was coming. It hadn't arrived yet, but I could feel it. Every note of the music, every flash of the cameras, every cheer was a countdown. Charlotte squeezed Daniel's hand. He smiled, oblivious. She glanced once more across the room. Her gaze flickered toward me for less than a breath, then snapped back to her groom. But I caught it. I caught it the way only someone who had waited years for this could. And I knew what it meant. The curtain was about to rise. The music swelled to its final peak. Charlotte and Daniel mounted the steps together, standing beneath the arch of roses, the embodiment of perfection. The applause thundered, echoing off the walls. I sat unmoving, calm on the outside fire in my chest. The reveal hadn't come yet. But it would. And when it did, Daniel's carefully constructed world would collapse right here in the very hall where he thought he was untouchable. The hall shimmered with golden light as waiters cleared plates and refilled glasses. The music softened, the chatter dimmed, and all eyes turned to the stage. It was the moment the groom had been waiting for, the grand toast. Daniel stood tall, tuxedo pressed to perfection, glass raised high. His smile carried the weight of a man who thought he had conquered the world. His voice boomed through the speakers, rehearsed and smug. Thank you all for being here on the most important day of my life. Tonight I am proud to introduce my wife, Charlotte Whitmore. She is proof that I always choose the right path. Applause erupted loud and eager. Guests clapped, as if they had just witnessed royalty ascend the throne. Daniel soaked it in chest-puffed grin, stretching wide. Then, as though he couldn't resist, he glanced at me. His eyes narrowed, lips curling with a private cruelty. Rebecca, he sneered into the microphone. You're not even half the woman my wife is. Laughter rippled. Not everyone laughed, but enough. The sound was sharp-pointed, echoing the humiliation he had planted years ago. I sat still, spine-straight, hands folded tightly in my lap. My face betrayed nothing, but inside my pulse thudded against my ribs. And then something shifted. Charlotte, still glowing in her couture gown, leaned toward Daniel. She smiled sweetly, the smile of a bride basking in attention. But her hand reached forward, steady and deliberate, and she slid the microphone from his grip. Daniel blinked, startled. A groom yielding his spotlight to his bride wasn't unusual. But the way she did it, the precision, the timing, froze the room. The applause tapered off. Chairs creaked as people leaned closer. Charlotte lifted the microphone to her lips. Her voice rang clear, crisp as glass. "Thank you, everyone, for celebrating with us. But before we continue, I want to introduce someone very special. Someone I'm proud to call my boss." A ripple of confusion cut through the hall. Guests glanced at one another, whispers stirring like wind through leaves. Daniel turned toward her, bewildered. "What are you doing?" he hissed, but the microphone caught enough of it for nearby tables to hear. I felt the air change. Charlotte didn't falter. She turned her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces before landing squarely on me. The spotlight followed, harsh and blinding. My stomach tightened as hundreds of eyes swung in my direction. She spoke again, louder now, her words carrying to every corner. "Please welcome Rebecca, CEO of Aurora Ventures and the new majority owner of Whitmore Holdings." The silence was instant and absolute. Then came the crash of glass. Someone had dropped their champagne flute. The shatter echoed like thunder. Gasps erupted, disbelief unraveling into frantic whispers. What did she say? Rebecca, CEO. Didn't Daniel call her a failure? I sat frozen for a moment, the weight of the reveal pressing down on me. It wasn't just my secret anymore. It was public, undeniable, irreversible. Daniel staggered back, face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came. His hands trembled at his sides. For once he had no script, no smug remark to throw like a dagger. Charlotte's gaze flicked to him, steady and unyielding. Then she stepped aside, leaving the spotlight empty, an invitation. I rose slowly. My chair scraped against the polished floor, the sound cutting through the cacophony of voices. My heels clicked with measured rhythm as I walked forward, the crowd parting without a word. Every step carried years of silence, years of dismissal, years of being pushed aside. I could feel them all behind me, every insult, every doubt hardening into steel beneath my feet. When I reached the stage, the light engulfed me. It was blinding, almost suffocating, but I didn't flinch. Daniel's eyes burned into me, desperate, panicked. His lips moved soundlessly, as if begging me to stop. But there was no stopping. The truth had already been spoken, and the room would never return to what it was. Charlotte lowered the microphone into my hand. Her smile was calm, resolute, as though she had just placed the final piece on the board. For a heartbeat, I just stood there, the metal cool against my palm. I could feel the anticipation building, the guests leaning forward, waiting for confirmation. Daniel's voice cracked at last, hoarse and furious. "This is a lie. Rebecca is nothing. She's always been nothing." The words fell flat, thin against the weight of Charlotte's declaration. No one cheered him now. No one laughed at his insult. I raised the microphone, my breath steady, my eyes locked on his. I think I said slowly, voice carrying across the hushed hall. It's time they all heard the truth. The crowd erupted again, louder than before, but this time the whispers weren't mocking. They were stunned, awed, afraid. Daniel staggered back another step, shoulders sagging, sweat glistening at his temple. The tables had turned, and he knew it. I held my ground under the lights, the hall pulsing with shock and anticipation. The air crackled, every guest caught between disbelief and dawning realization. This was it, the moment I had waited for, the shift that no one could undo. Daniel would never forget the night his own wife handed me the microphone that ended his illusion of power. The silence that followed Charlotte's announcement clung to the room like heavy smoke. I stepped onto the stage, the echo of my heels slicing through the stillness. Every eye was on me. Charlotte moved aside, her gown sweeping the floor as she left the spotlight for me. Daniel didn't move. He stood rigid, jaw slack, pupils blown wide like he was staring at something unrecognizable. His whole posture screamed disbelief. "Rebecca?" His voice cracked, the microphone trembling in his hand. "What kind of joke is this?" He spun toward Charlotte, forcing a laugh that rang hollow. "Sweetheart, you must be mistaken. Rebecca isn't a CEO, she's She's just a struggling freelancer. His words stumbled over each other, desperate, unconvincing. Charlotte didn't flinch. Her tone stayed calm, steady, cutting through the air. No mistake, Daniel. Every document has been signed. Rebecca is the CEO of Aurora Ventures, and Aurora now controls the majority of Whitmore Holdings. Gasps rippled across the hall. Chairs scraped against the floor as people shifted, pulling out phones, whispering in disbelief. I caught flashes of screens' news alerts lighting up in real time. Some already showed the headline, Aurora Ventures acquires majority stake in Whitmore Holdings. Daniel's face flushed a blotchy red. He gripped the microphone so tight I thought it might snap. Lies, he barked, his voice cracking. This is sabotage. You've tricked them. I didn't move. My expression stayed even. The room wasn't fooled. The more he yelled, the smaller he looked. Then came my father's voice, booming from the front row. His face was dark, jaw clenched so hard it trembled. Rebecca, what is the meaning of this? How dare you go behind your family's back? You've humiliated us all tonight. My mother clutched his arm, tears brimming, her own voice trembling. Why didn't you tell us? Why keep us in the dark? Their words weren't about pride in my achievement, not about shock that their daughter had built an empire. No, they were worried about appearances, about being blindsided, about the whispers around them. That stung more than Daniel's rage. But Daniel wasn't finished. His temper snapped. He hurled the microphone to the floor, the screech of feedback rattling through the speakers. The sound made guests jump a few, gasping as champagne sloshed onto white tablecloths. He stormed toward me, finger pointed like a weapon. You've always been jealous. His voice cracked into a raw shout. This is revenge, isn't it? You couldn't stand my success, so you came here to ruin my wedding, my life. Guests recoiled, shifting in their seats, pulling phones higher. Some were already streaming, red recording dots glowing in the dim light. Daniel was unraveling, and the world was watching. I held my ground. My breathing slowed steady, even as my pulse roared in my ears. No, Daniel. This isn't revenge. This is the truth. And the truth has a way of catching up whether you like it or not. For a second, his chest heaved, eyes darting, searching for support. He turned back to the crowd, but the faces staring at him were no longer adoring. They were wary, skeptical, even pitying. His carefully built image was collapsing before his eyes. Then he laughed, sharp, bitter, almost hysterical. No one believes you. You were always second best, Rebecca. You're not smart enough, not strong enough. You'll never be more than the forgotten one. The words stung, but not the way they used to. I stepped closer, closing the gap between us. In my hand, I held a small white rectangle, my business card. Aurora Ventures, CEO. My name is embossed in silver. The same card he once tossed to the floor like it was trash. I raised it now, placing it right in front of his face, forcing him to see. You called this worthless, I said, voice calm but sharp. But this card opened doors, built teams, signed contracts, and today it brought me here. His eyes flicked to it, then back to me. Panic flickered, raw and unmasked. I leaned in just enough for my words to cut through the chaos. You're the one who's been left behind, Daniel. Not me. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Even the whispering stopped. Cameras clicked, flashes stung the air, and I knew his humiliation had been immortalized. The groom, once triumphant, now undone by the sister he dismissed. My father half rose again, lips pressed in a hard line, but even he didn't know what to say. My mother dabbed her eyes, trembling in shame. Around us the crowd had shifted. No one was looking at Daniel with admiration anymore. Daniel staggered back a step, then another. Sweat shone on his forehead, his breath shallow, ragged. He looked smaller somehow, not the towering brother who once overshadowed me, but a man stripped bare, his arrogance crumbling. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to gloat. The scene spoke for itself. The hall, once filled with laughter and applause, now sat in charged silence. Daniel's chest heaved, his eyes wild, but there was no escape. His world had shifted, the ground beneath him gone, and for the first time everyone saw him not as the golden son, the perfect groom, but as what he truly was, powerless. The wedding hall was no longer a place of celebration. Murmurs swelled like a storm building under the surface. Chairs scraped glasses clinked nervously, and every glance shot toward my family. The chandelier above sparkled coldly, no longer grand but merciless, exposing cracks we had hidden for years. My father shot up from his chair, red-faced. His voice wavered, but the anger in it was sharp. "Rebecca, how dare you do this behind our backs? You've disgraced us in front of everyone we know. Do you realize what you've done to this family?" My mother clutched his arm, her hands trembling. "Why didn't you tell us? Why keep everything secret only to blindside us tonight? You've turned joy into shame." Their words echoed louder than the guests' whispers. Even now, standing in front of undeniable proof, they couldn't see me, only their reflection in the eyes of society. Relatives joined the chorus. A woman in pearls leaned forward, muttering not so quietly, "I warned you. Rebecca was never like Daniel. Always bitter, always scheming." Another uncle sighed, shaking his head. "We paraded Charlotte as our pride. Now this, all our faces are on the floor." Daniel's voice cut through ragged trembling, more from rage than strength. His tuxedo hung crooked, his composure unraveling. "See? She ruined everything. She couldn't stand to see me happy. Admit it, Rebecca. You planned this to destroy me." I locked eyes with him, steadying my breath. My chest ached, but I wouldn't falter. "No, Daniel. What I planned was my future. What I destroyed was the illusion you built. For years you failed, and they called you bold. I succeeded, and they called it luck. And tonight the truth terrifies you because it leaves you exposed." A ripple moved through the hall. Some guests pulled out their phones' cameras, flashing screens glowing. I caught sight of one young cousin live-streaming, his face alight with the thrill of scandal. I knew by morning this confrontation would be everywhere on social media, in news alerts, on business blogs, dissecting the downfall of the Harrisons. The betrayal stung sharper than Daniel's rage. Some relatives quietly slipped on coats, muttering excuses about early trains, eager to leave before their names were linked to mine. That silence, that cowardly retreat, cut deeper than any insult. Then Charlotte moved. Calm, deliberate, she stepped forward and placed her hand on my shoulder. "No one here was deceived," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "Rebecca didn't trick anyone. She waited. Daniel mocked her long enough for this truth to land where it hurt most. If blame belongs anywhere, it belongs to arrogance and blindness." Gasps rippled. A few claps broke through, hesitant at first, then more joined in. The sound rose, filling the hall, echoing off the marble walls. Guests who had just sneered now stood applauding, unwilling to be left on the wrong side of history. Daniel stumbled back, his mouth opening but no words coming out. My father's shoulders slumped, his hands gripping the back of his chair. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin, but she didn't look at me. Not once. I stood under the spotlight, not triumphant, not broken, simply awake. The family that should have been my refuge had turned into my harshest accusers. Their pride had been fragile glass, and tonight the truth had shattered it. I let my gaze sweep the room. Some eyes glowed with curiosity, others with admiration, and some with pure spite. But none dared dismiss me anymore. Then I turned back to my family. My voice was low, almost quiet, yet it carried. "I will not carry the weight of your denial any longer. This collapse, you built it yourselves." The applause grew louder, shaking the hall. And for the first time, I no longer felt like the outsider in my own story. The wedding hall was still trembling from the chaos of minutes before. Glasses rattled on the tables, chairs, scraped against marble floors, and the sound of people whispering ran like static through the air. I stood at the center, the spotlight bearing down so hard it made my skin prickle. For once I didn't think of hiding. I thought only of speaking. Charlotte handed me the microphone. The weight of it pressed into my palm, colder than I expected. My hand stayed steady. I raised my eyes and let my voice travel across the hall. For years I began slow and deliberate. I learned to keep silent when I was dismissed. I stood aside while my parents boasted about Daniel. I swallowed the whispers from relatives who said I was the leftover, the spare. I accepted it. I endured it. But tonight, my breath caught. Then I let it go strong. Tonight I will not remain quiet. The sound in the room shifted subtle at first. A few guests leaned forward, others exchanged glances. The hush was thicker than velvet, pressing in on everyone. I continued. Aurora Ventures. The company I built from nothing. Through sleepless nights, through sacrifices no one here ever bothered to see stands before you tonight as the controlling shareholder of Whitmore Holdings. Eyes darted around the room. Phones lifted, screens lit up. The buzz grew louder, but I raised my voice above it. And yes, I added, fixing my gaze on Daniel Aurora belongs to me. Which means that when my brother stood here and mocked me, telling the world I wasn't half the woman his wife is, he was insulting the CEO who now holds Charlotte's professional future. He was insulting me. Gasps erupted. I caught the flash of a reporter's camera at the edge of the room. Another guest whispered too loudly, "Check your phones, this is already online." Fingers swiped screens. As live updates spread the truth, moving faster than Daniel's denials could ever catch. That was when my father's voice thundered through thick with anger. "Rebecca, enough of this. You're humiliating us. This isn't the time to show off. You're tearing the family apart." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. I turned my eyes, holding his. "No, Father. This is the time. Because I have carried enough shame for all of us. Enough dinners where I was measured against Daniel. Enough dismissals of my worth. Tonight is not me disgracing this family. Tonight is me showing how favoritism and arrogance dragged this family into the mud." Murmurs rippled. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked away, uncomfortable. The silence afterward was jagged, brittle. Even the musicians in the corner faltered, their bowstrings quivering mid-air. I lifted the microphone higher, my words cutting clear through the thick air. From this moment on, I will not be Daniel's shadow. I will not let anyone decide my value. I am Rebecca, CEO of Aurora Ventures, and I stand proud of what I've built, not with privilege, not with favoritism, but with grit and perseverance. For a heartbeat, the room held still. Then applause burst out, scattered at first, then swelling into thunder. A man in the back rose to his feet, clapping hard. A woman joined, then another, until row by row the hall erupted with people standing applauding, some even cheering. Daniel's shoulders sank. He lowered his head as though trying to disappear into the ground. His tuxedo, flawless an hour ago, looked crumpled under the weight of shame. My mother tugged at my father's sleeve, whispering, urging him to sit down. But they avoided my gaze, their eyes darting anywhere else but me. In the front row, a journalist's camera focused on me, its red light blinking steadily. I realized this moment would not stay in this hall. It would travel, reaching beyond the chandeliers and the walls, out into headlines and homes. I breathed once deeply and let the applause wash over me. I had never asked for their recognition, but tonight it came unbidden, undeniable. Daniel finally looked up, his face pale, his lips moving without sound. For the first time in my life, he had no words to bury me with. No taunt, no sneer, just silence. I let the microphone rest back onto its stand. My hands didn't tremble. My voice didn't shake. Then I stepped forward, out of the spotlight. My heels clicked against the stage floor, each step firmer than the last. Something inside me snapped loose, a chain I hadn't even realized I'd been dragging my whole life. I wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore. I wasn't the humiliated sister. Tonight I had taken back my name. And as I walked down those steps, I felt it with every fiber of my being. I had freed myself. The wedding ended in chaos. Glasses tipped, heels clicked hastily toward the exit, and half-finished champagne flutes were left trembling on white tablecloths. Some guests rushed out, whispering into their phones. Others lingered, hungry for more scandal. For me, the noise blurred into something distant. My declaration still pulsed in my chest, steady, undeniable. But when the chandeliers dimmed and the hall emptied, silence pressed harder than applause ever had. The next morning, the world picked up the story for me. I didn't have to say another word. Clips from the reception spread across social media within hours. Millions watched Charlotte take the microphone from her groom, millions more replayed my own words. Comment sections overflowed. She's the CEO. He mocked her on stage. Overnight, what had once been humiliation turned into a story of reversal. Financial outlets seized on it. Headlines screamed from glossy magazine covers and glowing homepages. Dismiss sister reveals power play at Whitmore Holdings. Reporters dissected my silence, my composure, my reveal. Commentators analyzed Daniel's fall with relish, lining up his arrogance beside the truth that gutted him. For my family, the story unfolded differently. Daniel's name became a punchline. Clips of him stammering face-red hands, shaking aired alongside his toast where he declared, "I wasn't half the woman Charlotte was." He had written his own downfall, and now it played on loop. Business contacts who once courted him backed away. Partnerships evaporated. Invitations vanished. His career, once polished and promising, collapsed faster than I ever dared to imagine. At home, my parents carried out their own punishment. Relatives who had once praised them turned their backs. Aunts and uncles who once bragged about our family name now hissed in gossip. They paraded Charlotte like a trophy, one aunt muttered on a daytime talk show, and ignored the daughter who built an empire. My mother stopped answering calls. My father no longer showed up at his golf club. The pride that once lifted them now dragged them down. Weeks after the wedding, they appeared at my apartment door. They didn't storm in with authority. They stood in the hallway smaller than I had ever seen them. My mother's eyes shimmered with exhaustion. My father's shoulders sagged. "Rebecca," my mother began, her voice catching, "you embarrassed us. But maybe we deserved it. We were blind. We only ever saw Daniel. We never asked what you carried all these years." I studied them, the people who had shaped me, who had wounded me without ever realizing it. My chest tightened, but not with the old anger. "I don't need your praise," I said softly. "I only need respect. From now on, I live my life on my own terms, not yours." They nodded. My father's mouth opened then closed again. For the first time, they had nothing left to command. And in that silence, I heard the collapse of the authority they had held over me. Daniel was harder. He didn't come in person. He called one night, his voice strained, breaking in places he tried to hide. "You've won," he said. "But you destroyed our family." "Are you happy now?" I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. My tone was calm, sharp as glass. "No, Daniel. I didn't destroy us. Your pride did. Your need to crush me, to compare me, to live above me, that's what broke this family. All I did was let the truth speak." He hung up without answering. That was the last time I heard his voice before he left the city. Rumors said he sold his condo. Some claimed he fled to Europe. Others whispered about debts, about disgrace. I didn't ask. His absence was enough. Meanwhile, Aurora Ventures surged. The merger with Whitmore Holdings unfolded smoother than projections. Investors lined up eager to back the woman who had orchestrated the unthinkable. Charlotte kept her word. She worked under my leadership with poise, no bitterness. At one board meeting, surrounded by men twice my age, she turned to me and spoke clearly. "Rebecca, you are proof. Proof that women don't need permission to lead. We only need the chance." Her words settled into me. For years I had begged my family for that chance. Now I understood I had never needed it from them. I had claimed it for myself. A month later, the new headquarters gleamed with glass walls and sharp steel edges. Reporters gathered outside the ribbon-cutting cameras aimed at the plaque by the door, "Aurora Ventures Global Headquarters," and beneath it etched in silver letters my name, Rebecca CEO. Flashbulbs exploded. Microphones stretched toward me. But for once, I didn't feel cornered. I felt seen. That evening, I walked home alone through the city. Neon lights bled into the night sky. Car horns echoed through crowded avenues, and strangers brushed past without knowing who I was. And yet, I had never felt clearer. Karma had finished its work. I didn't destroy Daniel with anger. I didn't ruin my parents with vengeance. The truth had done everything for me. Pride had collapsed under its own weight, and I at last stood where I belonged. Sometimes the sweetest justice isn't crushing someone. It's surviving long enough for them to stumble in their own arrogance while you rise. I closed the door of my apartment and leaned back against it, the city still humming outside. "They finally see me," I whispered quietly. Then after a pause I added, "And even if they didn't, I see myself."